Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Tonight, we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, where the land is as vast as its legends and just as terrifying. From eerie lights haunting dark rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed, get ready for 10 of the most disturbing true Texas horror stories that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning, and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started, and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now let's dive into the darkness. There's a part of East Texas that most people pretend doesn't exist. Locals call it the Black Grove, a twisted patch of ancient trees squatting in the wetlands outside Anahuac. It's a place where the air itself feels wrong, thick with decay and something older. You won't find it on any map, but if you wander far enough off the hunting trails, if you ignore the rising unease gnawing in your gut, you'll find it. Or maybe it will find you. The grove is hidden behind a curtain of mist that never fully lifts, even on the hottest days. The trees there are massive and blackened, their trunks gnarled like the grasping hands of the dead. No birds sing. No insects buzz. There's only a deep, unnatural silence, broken now and then by soft, wet sounds, the kind of noise that makes your skin crawl without knowing why. Old families in Anahuac, the ones whose roots sink as deep into the land as the trees themselves, still whisper about it. They say the grove breathes when the fog rolls in, pulling in air and exhaling slow, fetid drafts that carry with them voices, low, broken things speaking in tongues no man should understand. They say the Black Grove is alive and it is hungry. Most shrug it off as folk tales, the kind of superstitions small towns cling to. But every so often someone goes missing, and those left behind remember. In October of 1987, a man named Cole, Jensen became one of those memories. Cole wasn't the kind of man you'd expect to get scared easy. He grew up in Anahuac, knew the marshes better than most. He could track a wounded animal for miles, knew which parts of the wetlands would suck a boot clean off your foot, and which stretches were quicksand pretending to be solid ground. Cole had that stubborn, iron-headed pride a lot of hunters have, the kind that makes a man spit in the face of old stories. That weekend, he went out with 3 friends to hunt deer. They left before dawn, the fog hanging so thick you couldn't see 10 feet ahead. By mid-morning, Cole had shot a large buck but only wounded it. The animal bolted, bleeding and wild, heading straight toward the mist-shrouded woods beyond, toward the Black Grove. The others warned him, half joking, half serious, not to follow it there. Cole just laughed, slung his rifle over his shoulder, and disappeared into the trees. He never came back. They searched for him for 2 days. Dogs refused to go near the grove's edge, whining and clawing at the dirt. The men who entered swore the air grew colder with every step. They found broken branches, spots of blood drying black in the muddy ground, and once, just once, a piece of torn fabric from Cole's jacket snagged high up in a tree, like high for any man to reach without help. There were no signs of struggle, no drag marks, no signs that Cole had been attacked by a wild animal. It was as if the woods themselves had swallowed him whole. On the morning of the 3rd day, they found him. He was standing, not lying, not slumped, standing between 2 massive, pitch-black trunks. His body was wedged so tightly it looked like the trees had grown around him. His arms hung limp at his sides. His head was tilted slightly upward like he had seen something in the sky. His eyes were wide open, so wide you could see the whites all the way around, frozen in a look of horror so deep it didn't seem human anymore. His mouth, God help them. His mouth was torn unnaturally wide, the corners of his lips split all the way to his cheeks, exposing bloody teeth and gums. It was as if something had tried to drag a scream out of him so big, so impossible that it broke him apart. The sheriff, a hardened man who had seen death in every shape, stumbled back when he saw it. There was something else, too, something no one could explain. Cole's skin was wrong. It had a grayish tint, and it seemed to ripple faintly under the morning light, as if tiny black veins were writhing just beneath the surface, alive. When they tried to pull him free, they couldn't. Thin, black root-like tendrils had pierced through his clothes and into his flesh, anchoring him to the trees. It took axes to hack him loose. Even then, the body didn't fall naturally. It slumped like a puppet with cut strings, and a smell like rotting flowers and stagnant water rushed out from the gaping wound between the trunks. The men didn't talk much on the way back. They didn't have the words. No autopsy was performed. The coroner, a man with decades of experience, refused to open the body bag. He simply signed the death certificate and called it an accident. Cole's funeral was held quietly, with no wake, no open casket. The Black Grove, after that, was left alone. But people say if you get too close to it on a foggy morning, you might still hear something. Not a cry, not a scream, a slow, wet breathing, deep and low, like something vast and ancient shifting in its sleep. And sometimes, if the mist parts just right, you'll catch a glimpse of a shape standing among the trees, tall, slack-jawed, mouth still torn wide, staring right at you with empty, endless eyes, waiting. In the far western edge of Texas, where the Rio Grande carves a jagged line between nations and the desert stretches endless and dead, there lies a wound in the earth known only to a few. It has no official name. Locals call it in hushed tones, the Howling Pit. They say the land there was cursed long before any man set foot upon it. That long before rivers had names, before mountains had shadows, something stirred deep below, and the ground never forgot. The first written records of the place came from the early 1920s, when a mining company, hungry for silver, drove men and machines into the desert near Presidio. They had heard rumors of rich veins running under the rocky soil, and in those years of dust and hunger, hope was enough to blind them to every warning. The mine ran deeper than any of them expected. Day after day, they dug, their drills screaming into the bones of the world, and at first, the rocks rewarded them, glittering with promises of wealth. But it was greed that pushed them deeper, greed that deafened them to the first sounds, rising from below. It started with a faint hum, like wind trapped in a bottle. The men laughed it off, blaming the shape of the tunnels. But the hum grew louder, stranger, a keening that seemed almost to form words in no language any man had ever spoken, a wail of rage and sorrow so ancient it made the strongest men weep without knowing why. Some claimed the mine itself seemed to breathe, the walls pulsing subtly, the air growing thick and heavy, as if the earth itself were alive and restless. The deeper they dug, the worse it became. One morning, after a night of restless, fevered dreams, the workers broke into a chamber unlike any they had seen before. A wide, black shaft plunged straight downward, its sides unnaturally smooth, as if melted through solid rock by a force no human hand could understand. When the first man peered into the pit, he staggered back, clutching at his chest. He could not describe what he had seen, only that the darkness seemed to move, to shudder and shift like the surface of some bottomless sea. And from that hole rose a sound that turned their blood to ice. It was not a simple noise, not the groan of stone, or the whisper of underground rivers. It was a symphony of agony and hatred, a million voices screaming at once from the unseen depths, voices that twisted and changed, sometimes pleading, sometimes cursing, sometimes laughing with a madness that no human mind could endure. Panic gripped the camp. Some men fled into the desert, never to be seen again. Others swore they saw figures moving in the shadows, twisted things with too many limbs and faces that did not hold. Tools were abandoned, horses broke free and bolted. The foreman, a man named George Renner, ordered dynamite thrown into the shaft in a desperate attempt to seal whatever horror they had unleashed. They packed the explosives and lit the fuse. The earth shuddered. Rocks fell, dust choked the sky. But when it cleared, the pit was still there, still open, still howling. Renner put a bullet in his own head 2 days later. The mine was officially abandoned the following week. The company records vanished. The mapmakers quietly erased the site. The desert began its slow work, reclaiming the land with sand and silence. And for nearly a century, the howling pit lay forgotten, hidden beneath the baking sun. Until 2011. That spring, a group of hikers drawn by rumors and old ghost stories found the pit. It was a broken ruin now, rimmed with jagged rocks and half-choked by creeping sagebrush. The metal beams of the old mine elevator jutted from the ground like the ribs of a buried giant. They didn't find it by accident. They heard it first. At midday, with the sun blazing overhead and no wind to stir the dust, the sound rose from the hole, thin at first, almost like the far-off cry of a wounded animal. But as they drew closer, the keening grew louder, shifting in tone and pitch, the voices layering upon each other until the hikers stood frozen, unable to tell whether they were hearing screams, laughter, or some unholy blend of both. One of the hikers, a man named Daniel Monroe, walked closer to the rim. The others called after him, but he did not seem to hear. His eyes were wide and glassy, his mouth moving silently. He stepped closer and closer. His toes reached the crumbling edge. One more step, and he would have fallen. It was only the desperate tackle of another hiker, Melissa Gray, that saved him. They dragged Daniel back, but something had changed in him. He muttered to himself in a tongue no one recognized, scratching strange symbols into the dust with trembling fingers. He refused food and water. That night, he vanished from their camp. They never found his body. Word spread. Other hikers went looking for the howling pit. Some came back babbling, raving about the ones beneath and the great hunger. Some didn't come back at all. Locals whispered that the pit was no simple mine shaft, that the miners had broken through into a place not meant for human eyes, a place older than the world, buried when the stars themselves were still young. A wound in reality where the rules of life and death no longer applied. If you go there, and God help you if you do, you will feel it the moment you step near. The ground grows strangely soft, like something breathing just beneath the surface. The air thickens, heavy with a smell like old blood and hot stone. Your ears will fill with a whispering, first faint, then deafening, as the pit calls to you in 1,000 dead tongues. You will feel yourself drawn forward, your feet moving without, your consent, your heart pounding in your ears. You will stand at the edge, staring into an endless black that seems to ripple and shudder, promising things too terrible to name. You will feel it pulling at you, not just your body, but your mind, your soul, the very fibers of your being. You will realize too late that the pit does not simply want you to fall. It wants you to join whatever howls below. And if you hear your name called from the depths, sweetly, pleadingly, run. Run until your legs fail and the desert claims you. Because if you hesitate, if you listen even for a second, it will already be too late. The howling pit waits. It is patient. It is hungry, and it remembers every voice it has ever swallowed. Cross Plains, Texas is a place forgotten by time. The town creaks and sags under the weight of old memories, the kind that stick to the bones and whisper when the wind blows just right. The fields out there stretch forever, broken only by the occasional sagging barn or rusted fence post. It's a place where the stars seem too close, too sharp, like needles pricking holes into the sky. The locals have learned not to talk about certain things. Some subjects sit heavy in the chest, like a stone you can't cough up, but the old families remember. They always remember, especially about the crooked thing. It began long before Cross Plains had a name, back when the land was raw and untamed, when settlers first carved their lives into the stubborn soil. There was a night, they say, when the moon didn't rise. The stars were swallowed by a darkness thicker than any storm cloud. And on that night, something terrible was born. Not into a house or barn, but out in the fields, under a gnarled mesquite tree that locals would later chop down and burn without ever speaking of why. It was not human, not truly. The old German settlers had a word for it: Fehlgeburt, a failed birth, an accident of creation, something the Earth had tried to abort, but had failed. It should not have lived, but it did. If you see it, and God help you if you do, you'll know right away that it's wrong. It's tall but bent at the spine, its limbs twisted like tree branches broken in a storm. It shuffles and staggers, as if its very body resists moving through this world. Its skin is pale and veiny, like wax stretched too thin and always glistening, as though freshly birthed no matter how many decades have passed. Its head hangs at an unnatural angle, like it's barely attached, swinging with each step like a rotten fruit about to fall. And its face is a nightmare that shifts if you look too long. Sometimes it looks almost human, sad and pleading. Other times it collapses in on itself like melting clay. But the eyes are the worst, not just in the face, but sprouting, randomly across its body, blinking, weeping, staring in every direction, as if it is constantly searching for something it lost long ago. There's a dare, a ritual really, passed down among the children of Cross Plains. They say if you go out to the old wheat fields at twilight, stand at the edge where the soil turns black, and sing one of the old German settler songs backward, the crooked thing will hear you. Nobody remembers the real words anymore. Just the melody, a low, dragging tune like a funeral dirge. It doesn't matter if you get it wrong. The crooked thing doesn't care about mistakes. If you sing it, it comes. Older kids used to dare the younger ones to try it. They'd laugh and jostle each other, pretending to be brave, but every now and then, someone would actually go through with it, and once you call it, it marks you. It won't always come right away. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it stalks the edges of your dreams first, curling up in the dark corners of your mind where the light can't reach. You might see a pale figure standing at the foot of your bed when you wake in the night, or hear soft, wet footsteps following you home from school, or dream of endless corridors made of rotting wood, with doors that breathe and walls that pulse like living flesh. The ones who saw it and lived were never the same. They spoke in strange, jumbled tongues, old languages no one could recognize. They scratched symbols into the dirt, spirals and crooked stars that made your skin crawl just to look at them. Some kids disappeared entirely. They'd wander out into the fields at night, barefoot, still wearing their pajamas, their eyes wide and empty. And they'd never come back. The old folks would say it was just coyotes, or a well they fell into, or that they ran off to the next town over. But in Cross Plains, no one really believed that. They knew the crooked thing had called them home. In recent years, the town has tried to forget. New families moved in. Gas stations and fast food joints sprang up along the highway. The old fields were left to wither, the grass growing tall and brittle. But something is stirring again. Last summer, a group of teenagers, city kids visiting their grandparents, decided to explore the old fields. They filmed themselves laughing and joking, mocking the stories they thought were just dumb superstitions. One of them found the song, an old crumbling book in their grandfather's attic, filled with strange hymns and prayers written in spidery, German script. They sang it backward, right there at the edge of the black soil, just before the sun dipped below the horizon. The video ends abruptly, just static, after the sound of something wet and heavy crashing through the grass. 3 of the kids are still missing. The one who came back, a girl named Ellie, won't speak. She just sits in her hospital bed, staring at the wall with wide, terrified eyes. And sometimes late at night, the nurses say she hums that strange, broken song under her breath. So if you ever find yourself driving through Cross Plains, and you get the sudden, awful feeling that something is watching you from the fields, don't stop. Don't slow down. And for the love of everything holy, don't sing, because the crooked thing never really leaves. It just waits, twisted, broken, patient. And once it hears you, it will follow you for the rest of your days. Until finally, on some cold, forgotten night, you wake to find it standing at the foot of your bed. Crooked head lolling, wet eyes, blinking, arms outstretched ready to drag you back to the place where it was born wrong and broken, and where it still waits for all of us. There are places in the world where the air itself seems too thick, too heavy with memories that refuse to die. The town of Mineral Wells, Texas, rests quietly in the shadow of the past, its sun-bleached streets and decaying buildings offering little in the way of comfort. But on the outskirts of this forgotten place, where the land stretches thin and lonely, stands an abandoned house, a structure so infamous that the mere mention of its location sends the bravest men into uneasy silence. It was in the 1980s that this house became known to all. Before then, it had merely been another crumbling relic, a place hidden behind rows of weeds and empty fields. But then, on an ordinary summer day, something extraordinary happened. Or perhaps something unspeakably old stirred from its slumber. The house had always been a strange thing, even from the outside. Its architecture was unremarkable, simple, square, with a sagging porch and windows that seemed too dark, too deep for a home. But the day it was discovered, it was no longer a home at all. A passing trucker who had been resting at a nearby gas station noticed something odd in the distance. The house was bleeding. It wasn't a trick of the light or a shadow playing its usual games. No, this was unmistakable. The walls, once a dull beige, were now stained with dark crimson streaks, running down like veins in a diseased body. The windows, normally dirty but transparent, had turned opaque, as though covered in a thick, bloody film. At first, the trucker assumed he was imagining things, but as he approached, the truth became clear. He reported what he saw, and soon enough, a small group of local authorities arrived at the scene. The door creaked open to a sight so grotesque that even hardened officers recoiled. Every surface of the house was covered in blood, the floors, the walls, the ceilings, all dripping in a fresh, viscous crimson. Tests conducted later would confirm that it was human blood, but there was one crucial detail. No bodies were found. The house was empty. There were no signs of struggle, no signs of anyone having been present, just blood. Everywhere. The house, as it turned out, had been home to a family, a husband, wife, and 2 young children. But they had vanished just days before the discovery, leaving everything behind. Their clothes, their personal belongings, even their pets. The only trace of their existence was a single hastily written note that read, "Get out, it's coming for you. The walls will eat you alive." It was an incoherent scribble, half-mad, written in a spasm of terror. But those who saw the family before they fled said they were pale, shaken, as if they had seen something so dreadful it threatened to tear the fabric of their sanity. The woman, especially, had been different. Her once bright eyes were wide, with a kind of terrified knowledge, as though she knew that whatever had taken root in the house was older than anything human. They fled, leaving the house to its bleeding, and no one ever saw them again. The true horror of the house did not come from the blood. No, that was merely the symptom. The real terror was something deeper, something buried in the very walls of the structure. Neighbors, those few who still lived near the outskirts, told stories of strange sounds in the dead of night. At first, they dismissed it as the wind, or the house settling, but after the family had fled, the sounds became too distinct to ignore. The sound of wet footsteps, slow, deliberate, slapping against the porch at all hours, as though someone or something was pacing back and forth, dripping blood with every step. And then there were the doors. The house had no reason to be intact. No reason to have any sort of life left in it. Yet at night, the doors would slam, the sound echoing through the surrounding fields, and not just the doors of the main rooms. These slamming doors would come from places that should not exist, rooms that were never there when the house was first built. It was as if the house itself was breathing, expanding and contracting, pulling something else into this reality. Something foreign, but perhaps the most terrifying part of all came not from the sounds, nor the blood, but from what the family had seen. On the night before they fled, the wife, Teresa, had awoken with a start, hearing something crawling. Something wet, like the sound of thick fingers dragging across wood. She turned her gaze to the wallpaper in the living room, a cheap floral print that had long since begun to peel and crack. And then in the dim light of a flickering lamp, she saw them, pale, spider-like hands stretching out from behind the wallpaper. They were thin, the color of old bone, but their fingers, they were wrong, too long, too spindly, too many. The hands moved as though they had a mind of their own, reaching out toward her, curling and scraping against the wall as they tried to pull themselves free. It was then that Teresa screamed. Her husband James woke in a panic, rushing to her side, but by the time he looked at the wall, the hands were gone. Only the faintest traces of blood remained on the wallpaper, as though the hands had been smeared across the surface in their desperate crawl. The family fled that very night, never looking back. The house, now left to its own devices, continued to pulse with some unknown malevolent energy. In the years that followed, the house was often visited by curious souls, some seeking answers, others simply drawn by the ominous reputation it had acquired. But none of them stayed long. The few who dared enter spoke of strange sensations, an overwhelming feeling of being watched, of having eyes in the walls, of something inhuman lurking just beyond their perception. One man, who went in to investigate, claimed that the house was alive, not in the way a plant or animal lives, but in a way that was both alive and dead, like something waiting for its next meal. He described seeing shadows that moved on their own, and feeling the blood seeping through the floorboards, thick and hungry. Today, the house stands abandoned, crumbling beneath the weight of time and neglect. The bloodstains have long since faded, but those who live nearby swear that if you pass by at night, you can still hear it. The sound of wet footsteps slapping across the porch. The sound of a door slamming shut in a room that shouldn't exist. Some say it's the wind. Others say it's something far worse. Whatever the case may be, one thing remains certain. The Bleeding House of Mineral Wells is not simply a house. It is something else, something born from a place too dark for human minds to comprehend. And if you listen too closely, if you stand too near the house at night, you might hear the walls whispering back to you. And then, maybe, just maybe, you'll hear the pale hands crawling out to meet you. Out in the barren expanse of West Texas, where the desert's breath is dry and the stars seem to flicker with a distant, mocking light, there lies a place both known and unknown. It is a place where reality itself seems to crack and bend. Marfa, a town whose name resonates with an eerie and foreboding tone. The Marfa lights, those strange flickering orbs that dance over the desert floor, are what most speak of when discussing this forsaken locale. But what the many overlook, what is never whispered aloud in casual conversation, are the voices. At 3:33 a.m., when the world hangs heavy in the suffocating silence of the desert night, something stirs. The Marfa lights are not the only strange phenomenon to grace this forsaken land. For on moonless nights when the heavens are closed and the winds howl like some forgotten demon, a strange singing rides the air. It is not the sweet, melodic tune of some ethereal choir. No, it is a harmony, layered in a way that grates upon, the mind scraping against the very fabric of sanity like knives drawn over brittle bone. The sounds are discordant, yet perfect in their horribleness. An unnatural choir of voices not meant for human ears. The harmonies clash and twist, seeming to come from all directions, though none can say where. They float on the wind, curling around the jagged peaks of the distant mountains, slipping between the cracked desert floor, writhing through the air like the agonized, disjointed thoughts of the dying. The music, for lack of a better word, seems to twist the air itself, warping reality, reaching into the listener's skull and then pulling something out. Those brave enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to follow the sound report. Strange things. Footprints, they say, can be found where the wind is still, where the desert's vast emptiness seems to breathe with an unnatural life. These footprints, though, are not those of any human or animal. No, they are unholy, unnatural, and utterly wrong. There are hoofed prints, grotesque and alien, some large enough that they could only belong to an incomprehensible beast. There are clawed marks, deep gouges in the sand, as if something with the strength to rend stone had dragged itself across the earth, scraping against the land with maddening, awful intent. But it is the others, the footprints that haunt the Yashim, mind long after they are glimpsed, that strike terror into the heart. These tracks appear human, or rather, almost human. The footprints are strangely shaped with 6 toes, and their size suggests that they belong to something far taller than any man. The knees of the creature that left them seem to bend backward, as if its very bones had been twisted, its limbs malformed by some terrible force. It walks as though it were not meant to walk at all, and yet the steps leave behind a trail that is as undeniable as it is incomprehensible. Those who have ventured into the desert on such nights speak of seeing these prints following them with a growing sense of unease until they come to a place where the very air feels wrong, a place out of time. And there, beneath the unfathomable desert sky, where the lights flicker like the feeble breath of a dying soul, the singing reaches its climax. It is then that the voices reach their peak, rising and falling in a rhythm that is both sickening and seductive. The dissonant harmonies, layered like the rusted plates of some monstrous, forgotten machine, call out. Those who stand at the edge of the desert, trembling with a sense of impending madness, hear the truth of the music. It is not human. It is not the sound of mortal tongues. The voices that rise in the wind are those of something older, something otherworldly. They do not speak in words, but in an ancient, forgotten language that twists the mind into knots, gnawing at the sanity of any who dare to listen for too long. Some say the music has an alluring quality, as if it calls them, beckons them toward something they cannot name. It pulls at them, filling their veins with a terror that thrills them, numbing their fear and replacing it with a horrific yearning. It is a call, one that lingers in the heart like a deep ache, a call to something that has waited for eons to make its presence known. But there is more to it than that. The truth, of course, is far darker than any of the few who have lived to speak of it might say. For it is not the lights that are the true source of terror in Marfa. It is not the strange footprints or even the eerie sounds that have plagued the land for generations. It is the choir itself. Those who have ventured too close, those who have stood in the desert on those cursed nights, hear something that is far worse than mere song. They hear the voices of the damned, the souls of the long dead, trapped between worlds. The music is their cry, their eternal torment, their attempt to escape the prison they have been cast into. It is said that the devil's choir is a legion of fallen beings, demons who once walked the earth as gods, but were cast down to wander, the wasteland of Marfa. Bound by forces beyond reckoning, these entities now sing in endless, dissonant harmony, hoping for a chance, however fleeting, to escape the abyss they have been cast into. Their music is the sound of their suffering, their eternal desperation. And those who listen too closely, who follow the strange tracks in the sand to their source, find themselves drawn into something that cannot be described, a place beyond time, beyond sanity. There, they meet the faces of the choir, twisted, broken beings with too many eyes, mouths that smile with teeth that should not exist, and fingers that stretch unnaturally toward them. Some say the souls of those who listen to the choir are never seen again. Their bodies, though sometimes found, are hollowed out, their minds gone, their voices twisted beyond recognition. Others say that the souls of those who listen become part of the choir, their bodies rising from the sands, joining the voices in the dissonant harmony, trapped forever in the desert's grip. The devil's choir of Marfa sings on, as it has for centuries, perhaps longer. On those moonless nights when the wind is just right and the lights dance their eerie ballet over the desert floor, the sound is always there, rising, calling, beckoning to those who are foolish enough to listen. There are whispers, of course, that the choir has not been confined to Marfa alone. There are stories that it travels, shifting, moving with the winds, creeping into the minds of the unwary, drawing them toward the desert where the lights flicker and the shadows twist. Perhaps it is not just Marfa that suffers. Perhaps the voices have already begun to move, slithering out into the world beyond, but that, as they say, is a story for another night. In the quiet town of Jefferson, where the Mississippi River glistens like a mirror to forgotten worlds and the wind whispers through the cypress trees, there exists a secret, buried beneath layers of dust and time. It is not the kind of secret one would readily speak of in the light of day. It is the sort of truth that lingers in the corners of old hotels, whispered only when the sun has gone down and the shadows stretch long. The town, with its antique charm and quiet streets, has become a haven for tourists seeking history and old-world allure. The hotels, some of which date back over a century, are filled with creaky floors and grand, faded chandeliers, with rooms that seem to echo with the footsteps of past generations. But in the oldest bed and breakfasts, those places that seem too worn to be truly alive, there exists a guest, one who checks in under different names but never leaves. Each time the guest arrives, it is under a new name. No two visits are ever the same, for the identity of this strange being shifts like smoke in the breeze. The staff, having seen it for years, do not speak of it directly, but all have come to know the ritual. The pale figure arrives with a listless grace, its movements languid and almost unnatural, like a corpse too fresh to have forgotten the motions of life. Its face, or rather the absence of one, is what draws the most attention. Blank, smooth, and devoid of any distinguishable feature, the guest's head is like an expanse of nothingness, a hollow space that sucks in the light and fills the room with an eerie, oppressive darkness. When asked for a name, it always gives one, but the names seem to dissolve from the memory of the staff as quickly as they are spoken. They remember only that it demands to stay in the back rooms, where the windows do not face the river. It is always the same, a peculiar insistence that suggests something darker, some unnatural necessity that drives this figure away from the water. The guest does not speak much, and when it does, its voice is like the creak of old wood underfoot, unsettling, harsh, and lacking in any true warmth. The staff are accustomed to its presence, but they cannot shake the sensation that something is wrong with it. It has a quiet, unseen power that seems to make the air thicker, the shadows longer, as if it is not meant to exist in this world at all. When the sun dips beneath the horizon and the rooms of the inn settle into the silence of the night, the other guests begin to notice something unsettling. It begins with a slight, imperceptible chill that seeps into the walls, creeping like a fog that refuses to lift. But then, as the clock strikes midnight, those staying in the same wing as the guest often see it. Reflections in the mirrors. They first notice it in the corner of their eye, a shape that does not belong. Tall and trembling, this figure stands just behind them, standing still like a phantom wrapped in darkness, its movements jerky, as if not fully attuned to the physical laws of the world. The strange thing is that, no matter how often the guest appears, no one has ever truly seen it directly. Those who have looked into its face are driven mad or lost to the labyrinthine corridors of their own mind, and none are left whole after a direct confrontation. It is always there, behind them, lurking like a shadow that should not exist in the pale reflection of their room. But when the guest's name is called, when the figures stand up to confront it, it is gone, as if it had never been. All that remains is a cold, sickly presence that lingers in the room, an uncomfortable sensation that claws at the mind, and always, the silent, unblinking stare of that faceless form, watching and waiting. The maids know. The maids know the scent. There is an odor, an overwhelming stench that fills the halls when the guest stays over. It is a smell of decay, of river mud that has sat for too long under the stagnant water. But there is something more to it, something harder to identify, something more metallic that clings to the air like rusted iron. The scent of coppery blood, as if the very walls of the hotel had been touched by something that bleeds eternally. It is not the smell of a fresh wound, but something far worse. The scent of long dead things, things that should have decayed long ago. but instead remain preserved in a state of unnatural stillness. The maids report that it grows stronger as the night deepens, a foul perfume that fills the corridors and seeps into the furniture until it is impossible to ignore. Those who have stayed the longest, who have endured the most nights with the guest, begin to see something worse. Their reflection in the mirrors changes. Their eyes grow hollow, their skin pale and drawn, and their smiles stretch unnaturally. The guest, though ever present, seems to drain something from them, something vital, something that cannot be replaced. The locals know the truth, even if they refuse to speak of it. The endless guest is not of this world. It is a thing trapped between the realms of the living and the dead, a force that haunts the old places where time has not been kind. It is a creature of hunger, of loneliness, of deep, dark longing for something it cannot name. It does not care for life or death. It simply exists, feeding on the memories and the souls of those who dare to stay in its presence. It is not a ghost, for it has no past. It is not a monster, for it has no future. It is a thing that has existed for longer than any human mind can comprehend, slipping through time like a shadow cast by something ancient and unforgiving. It has no name, for names are a thing of the living, and the endless guest is as old as the dust that coats the furniture, as eternal as the river that flows just beyond the back windows of those cursed rooms. Some say that if you leave before the guest checks in, you are spared its influence. But there are always those who remain, drawn by the strange magnetic force that compels them to stay, who can never quite leave. They speak of the guest in hushed tones, as if to speak its name aloud would summon it, would call its attention. But to speak of it is to ensure that the guest will eventually find you. To feel its cold gaze is to know that you have been marked, that you have crossed the threshold into a realm that should never have been breached. And if you are unfortunate enough to stay, to linger just a little too long, you will become part of its endless cycle. Just as those who came before you, just as those who stayed before, you too will be claimed. Not by death, but by something far worse. A continuing, endless presence that will never release you, nor allow you to leave. The cursed hotel. The endless guest will never let you go. There are places in the world, seldom spoken of by those who know, where the shadows stretch long and time seems to falter. One such place is the forsaken town of Lajitas, tucked in the sun-baked hills of West Texas, where the desert winds whisper, secrets too terrible to remember. There, behind the ruins of a long-abandoned trading post, lies a well so old, so encrusted with the detritus of forgotten years, that it seems to pulse with a malevolent presence. And in that well, beneath the dry, cracked earth, something waits. A hunger older than the stars themselves, a thing that wears the faces of those it devours. The year was 1964, a year that would forever scar the minds of those few who remained, in Lajitas. It was during the summer, when the sun boiled the land until it shimmered like a furnace, that a young woman named Adeline vanished. She had been traveling through the desert, a lonely wanderer from the distant east, with nothing more than a bundle of clothes and a few coins to her name. The tourists who had seen her that day would remember little of her except for her smile, a strange, unsettling smile that stretched too wide across her face, one that seemed to betray some unspeakable knowledge, or perhaps a madness too potent to contain. They had been standing by the trading post surrounded by the endless desert expanse when they saw her. Adeline had approached them, her steps slow, deliberate, as though guided by an unseen hand. She greeted them with a smile that made the hairs on the backs of their necks rise. It was not a smile of joy, nor of welcome. It was something unnatural, a grin that suggested a secret buried deep within her soul, a secret she could no longer keep. For a moment, the tourists stared at her, trying to make sense of her presence in that forsaken place. But before they could ask, she turned away, walking off into the barren landscape, disappearing like a mirage into the parched earth. That was the last time she was ever seen. Weeks passed, and the desert, as it is wont to do, swallowed up all traces of her, leaving nothing but the gnawing sensation of her absence. It was not until a group of cowhands returned to the area on their rounds through the desolate outskirts that they stumbled upon something so terrible it would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The men had been drawn to the well, a place they had never thought to revisit, too ancient, too cursed for even the bravest among them to approach. But on that fateful day, something compelled them. As they neared the dry, cracked well, they noticed a strange scent in the air, a faint metallic tang that seemed to carry with it a deep, dreadful weight. At first, they assumed it was nothing more than the stench of the desert, rotting plants, the decayed bones of animals long forgotten, but as they drew closer, the smell grew worse, more putrid, as though something alive had been abandoned beneath the earth, festering in its own decay. They found her there. Adeline's skeletal remains had surfaced from the depths of the well, the bones half buried in, the dry, cracked dirt, as though they had been forced upward by some unnatural force. But it was not her bones alone that made the men tremble. It was the sight of her skull, which was cracked in a way that could only be described as unnatural. Her jaw was split wide open, the teeth broken and scattered, yet the skull grinned, an eternal haunting grin that stretched far beyond the limits of the human face. It was a smile too wide, too grotesque for any living being to bear. And in that smile, there was something too sweet, something that beckoned with the allure of something otherworldly. As the men stared in horrified silence, they saw that the remains of others lay scattered about the well, skulls mostly, but no bodies. Each skull was grinning in the same manner, unnaturally wide, their jaws gaping open as though they had been caught mid-scream, yet frozen in time, eternally locked in the same eerie, unnerving grin. These were the remains of the missing, the lost souls who had wandered too close to the well and had been claimed by whatever haunted it. But it was the faces that haunted the cowhands most, the faces that were familiar. Faces they had seen before, faces from the town, from their past, faces of people who had disappeared over the years, whose disappearances had been dismissed as accidents, misfortunes, or simply the lonely fate of the desert. But now, as they stared into those empty sockets, they realized that something unnatural had been at work all along. Local legend, whispered among the oldest families in Legitas, claims that something ancient and hungry resides within that well, something that feeds on the living. The well, they say, was not always so dry. Long ago, it had been a source of water for the traders who frequented the post, but as time passed, the water grew tainted, foul, and the land around it began to wither. The locals began to whisper of strange happenings, disappearances, madness, and visions of faces that would appear in the waters, faces that belonged to no one they had ever known. It is said that the well is not merely a hole in the earth. It is a portal, a doorway to something far older, something wrong that had been buried beneath the desert long before the first settlers came. And as the years passed, the well became more than a mere source of water. It became an insatiable hunger, a thing that wore the faces of those it devoured. Those who came too close would hear whispers in the wind, strange voices calling their names, beckoning them to the edge of the well, promising them a glimpse into a world beyond the veil. But those who fell prey to its call did not die as one would expect. Instead, they became part of it, their faces stolen, their identities consumed, leaving only the grinning skulls to serve as a reminder of the terrible truth. The well remains a place of fear, and no one dares to approach it. The people of Legitas avoid the area, and even those passing through the desert are warned to keep their distance. They say that if you look into the well long enough, you will see faces, not the faces of the dead, but of the living, those who wander too close and are claimed by the hunger that waits beneath. And if you hear a voice calling to you from the shadows, if you feel a presence beside you in the stillness of the desert night, it is too late. You will smile too, wide and unnaturally wide, and you will walk straight into its arms where you will be devoured, your face stolen, your soul consumed. Some say the desert will claim us all in the end, but for those unlucky enough to stumble upon the smiling bones of Legitas, the end is not a quiet one. It is a terrible fate, a fate of endless hunger, of twisted grins and stolen faces, of being devoured by a thing that wears the smiles of its victims, forever smiling, forever hungry. Beneath the sunlit surface of Lake Travis, where the waters gleam with a deceptive tranquility, there is a secret, a thing that dwells in the shadowed depths, waiting, hungry, and ancient. It is a secret few dare acknowledge, but one that haunts the minds of those few souls who have ventured too close. The boaters, the fishermen, and the divers, they know the truth, though none of them would ever speak it openly, lest they invite the darkness that lurks below. There are places in the world where the water is not just water, it is a veil, a membrane separating the world of the living from the horrors that wait beneath. Lake Travis is such a place. Its placid surface, a deceptive mirror under the Texas sky, has been the scene of many inexplicable tragedies. Tragedies that some attribute to nothing more than bad luck or chance, but others know better. In the summer of 1979, a group of divers descended into the murky depths of Lake Travis, their mission to recover the body of a man who had drowned in the lake the previous month. The water, despite being warm and inviting on the surface, was often murky below, an ominous green that swallowed light and vision alike. The divers were seasoned men, accustomed to the dark mysteries of deep waters, but what they found in that lake, deep beneath its seemingly calm surface, was a terror so profound that even their hardened minds would never fully recover. As they descended, the temperature of the water began to change. At first, they thought it was nothing more than a current, a shift in the layers of the lake's depths, but soon they realized that the cold was not natural. It was as though some invisible hand had reached out from the abyss and chilled the very marrow in their bones. In an instant, the warm waters turned to ice, wrapping around them in a suffocating grip. The cold was not like anything they had experienced before, a raw, biting cold that seemed to draw the warmth from their very skin, sinking into their lungs, pulling their breath into gasps of shock. But the cold was only the beginning. One of the divers, a man named Rick Dalton, was the first to see it. He had descended further than the others, his flashlight sweeping over the lake's uneven, silt-covered floor. His beam of light danced over stones and rotting wood from the wrecks of old boats, remnants of the lake's history. But then the light settled on something wrong, something that should not have been there. At first, it appeared to be nothing more than a shadow, an unnatural blackness that defied the flashlight's beam, a patch of the lake floor that seemed far too deep, far too impenetrable for the surrounding water. But as Rick moved closer, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath coming in sharp gasps through his regulator, he saw it, a shape, a vast black shape stretching out into the distance, far larger than any creature he had ever known. It was no ordinary creature. No animal of this world could have lived in such depths, let alone take such a form. The shape was slick, its surface glistening like oil or wet glass, a translucent sheen that reflected the weak beam of his flashlight in 1,000 ghostly reflections. It was as though the very skin of this thing was made of some viscous, alien substance that rippled with an unnatural, otherworldly fluidity. Then, he saw the tendrils. Long, sinuous appendages coiled and writhed from the shape's body, reaching out into the water like hungry snakes, seeking, grasping, as if the creature itself were alive in ways no earthly being could ever be. There were no eyes, no face, but Rick could feel its gaze upon him, piercing through the very darkness, an intelligence far older and far more sinister than any living thing on Earth. It was a presence, something that had existed in the deep places of the world long before man had set foot on this land. Rick's instinct screamed at him to flee, but as he turned to ascend toward the surface, he was struck by a sudden realization. The corpse of the man they had been sent to find was nowhere to be seen. And then, in the dead silence of the lake's depths, he felt it. A tug, as if something had wrapped around his body, pulling him, dragging him toward the shape. The cold intensified, biting through his suit, a suffocating sensation that made his chest tighten and his heart race. With every ounce of strength, he swam toward the surface, the water growing colder still, the black shape below him moving, shifting, as though it were aware of his escape, as though it would follow him to the edge of the earth itself. Rick emerged from the water, gasping for air, his face pale and haunted. The other divers, who had been ascending alongside him, noticed the change in him immediately. The terror in his eyes was unmistakable, and when he spoke, his voice was trembling, almost incoherent. He told them nothing of what he had seen, not at first. The words could not form on his lips. He could not make them. They only heard the whispers that came from him, the strange, broken, half-formed sentences about something vast, something that lived in the depths, something that could not be described in human terms. The team abandoned the mission. The drowned man's body was never recovered, and neither was any trace of the creature. The divers left the lake with their lives, but they carried something else with them, something that no human mind should ever know. Years passed, and the Yifhar lake remained, unchanged on the surface, its placid waters hiding whatever nightmares festered beneath. But occasionally, on quiet mornings when the world is still, something unnatural stirs beneath the water. Boaters report in hushed voices strange occurrences. A sudden, unnatural cold that grips the water, freezing the air itself, chilling them to the bone. A thick black film sometimes spreads across the surface of the lake, slick and oily, moving, in grotesque patterns that resemble writhing tendrils. If one stares at the oily film for too long, the patterns seem to shift, slowly, almost imperceptibly, like something is stirring beneath the water, watching, waiting. Some have ventured into the lake despite the warnings, but none have returned with any explanation. The lake, they say, is not a lake. It is a portal, a gateway to something that should not exist, a place where the rules of nature bend and twist in ways that defy comprehension. The thing beneath Lake Travis does not care for the passage of time. It does not care for the men who come seeking answers, or the divers who brave its depths. It waits, patient, hungry, eternal, and those who come too close to its dark, slick form never return the same. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world holds its breath, the lake remains still, its waters hiding a secret so ancient, so incomprehensible, that no mortal mind could hope to understand it. But if you listen closely, you might hear it. The faint ripple of water moving where it should not. The whisper of something vast shifting in the depths, waiting for its next visitor. On the long-forgotten roads that stretch like veins through the desolate country near Huntsville, Texas, there lies a crossroads, unmarked, hidden in plain sight, yet all too familiar to those who know the shadows cast by the prison walls. The place is known to few by name, and fewer still venture near it, for those who have felt its presence speak of a dread so ancient and profound that it cannot be shaken by the passage of time. The land around the crossroads is scarred, its soil darkened by the stains of 1,000 wrongdoings. For many decades, Huntsville had been a place of death, where men and women met their end at the hands of the law. The prison at the heart of the town stands as a grim reminder of this unholy purpose, a monolithic structure casting its oppressive shadow over the land, as if the very bricks themselves were made from the suffering of those trapped within. It is no wonder, then, that the crossroads, barely a few miles away, remains a place whispered about only in the deepest recesses of the night. The first signs of its malevolent nature are subtle enough. Travelers passing through report strange mechanical failures, cars stalling inexplicably, engines sputtering to a halt as if they had been drained of life. Phones, once dependable, suddenly lose their signal, leaving those who wander too close, isolated and vulnerable in the dark. But these are only the beginning, for once you arrive at the crossroads after the witching hour, something else begins to happen. A creeping, suffocating presence that coils around the very air you breathe. It begins with a subtle feeling, like the air has thickened, pressing against you, suffocating you with its weight. And then, when the clock strikes midnight, the screaming starts. It does not come from the throat of a living person, but from the earth itself, as if the land has opened wide to release the sound. The scream is not human, nor is it animal. It is the scream of something ancient, something that has endured suffering and death for centuries, born of the blood-soaked earth and the countless lives that were sacrificed upon it. Old-timers who know the place call it the voice of the land. And they say it is not the scream of one woman, but the cry of 1,000 souls. Of every man and woman who had their final moments stolen from them, their screams unheard, silenced by the cold indifference of the executioner's blade. But it is not just the sound that chills the blood. It is the intensity, the way the scream seems to crawl beneath your skin, burrowing into your very being, pulling at the deepest parts of your soul, urging you to listen, to understand. The scream is not just a noise, it is a command, a summons. It beckons you closer, drawing you into the heart of the crossroads where the very earth seems to writhe in its anguish. There are those who claim to have seen more than just the screams. They tell tales of visions, distorted and fleeting, of figures standing at the edge of the crossroads, their forms barely distinguishable from the shadows, their eyes hollow and empty, staring back at the living. Some say they are the spirits of the executed, trapped in this cursed land, unable to escape the terrible thirst that lies beneath their feet. The land, they say, drinks from the blood of the guilty, its soil soaked with the red of countless executions, and now it thirsts still. But it is no ordinary thirst. The earth hungers for something deeper, something more primal than blood. It feeds on the suffering of the souls that have passed through this place, on their despair, their pain, their fear. The land is a living thing, an entity that has grown on the torment of the condemned. And it waits. Those who are brave, or foolish, enough to linger too long at the crossroads often speak of the feeling of being watched. Some claim to hear their own footsteps echoed back at them, while others say they feel an invisible pressure building, as if the earth itself is pressing in on them, pushing them toward the center, toward the heart of the crossroads. And then, the scream comes again, closer, louder, as though it is no longer coming from the earth, but from something beneath it, something that stirs in the depths, waiting for its next victim. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the crossroads is not the screaming, nor the shadows that seem to move on their own, nor even the oppressive air that settles like a blanket over the area. No, the true horror lies in the stories of those who have disappeared, vanishing without a trace after stepping foot on that cursed stretch of road. They are the ones who stayed too long, who listened too intently, and who found themselves drawn into the earth's insatiable thirst. A few have returned, but they are not the same. Their eyes are vacant, their voices hollow. They speak in half-formed sentences, muttering about things they cannot recall, about the land that took them, about the voices that whispered their names in the dark. And then there are those who never return at all. The locals know to avoid the place. They know the land's hunger and the darkness that rises from the crossroads like smoke from a funeral pyre. They have lived with the stories for generations, passed down through whispered words and fearful glances. They know that the crossroads does not forgive, it does not forget. And so, when the night falls in Huntsville and the prison lights flicker in the distance, they say a prayer and they keep their distance. For the earth beneath that cursed crossroads is alive, and it remembers the blood that was spilled upon it. It waits for the next soul to wander too close, to hear the woman scream, to feel the land's terrible thirst. For the crossroads of Huntsville, as the old-timers say, never lets go. In the arid stretch of the Texas-Mexico border, where the land seems to lose itself in an endless horizon of dust and sun-baked earth, there exists a town not found on any map. No highway signs guide the way, no directions mark its place. Yet, if you drive long enough and if your eyes wander to the cracked asphalt beneath you, you may spot a sun-bleached sign, tattered and forgotten, pointing toward a town that should not be. The name on that weathered sign is Zaragoza, a name so ordinary, so benign, that you might think it a place of quiet peace, a forgotten village hidden away in the vast expanse. But those who have ventured toward that sign and have taken the road less traveled have never returned the same. It begins with an eerie stillness, the kind of silence that settles into the bones, making even the air feel thick and suffocating. The cracked asphalt beneath your tires seems to stretch on forever, the landscape becoming barren, the sun blinding in its merciless heat. There is no sign of life, no birds in the sky, no rustling in the brush, just the desolate emptiness of the desert. And then, after what feels like hours, you will see it. A town on the horizon, a cluster of buildings leaning at unnatural angles, their facades warped and twisted by the ravages of time. Zaragoza, though you may not yet know its name, stands before you, as if conjured from the very earth itself, a place outside of time, held suspended in an eternal, agonizing dusk. As you enter Zaragoza, the first thing that strikes you is the way the light behaves. It is not the warm, golden glow of evening or the cool, silvery light of twilight. It is something else, an oppressive gloom that hangs in the air like a thick fog, casting everything in strange, shifting shadows. The buildings, once sturdy and proud, now lean and sag, as though burdened by an unseen weight. The windows are dark, their glass cracked, the doors ajar but unused. The streets are empty, save for the occasional scrap of wind-blown paper tumbling. Past your feet, it is quiet, unnaturally quiet. Not even the sound of your own footsteps seem to echo in the streets. The air itself feels as if it has absorbed the sorrow of the place, saturated with a damp, fetid rot that clings to everything. It is as though the town itself is decaying, slowly being consumed from within, its very existence draining away into the earth beneath. At first, you will think you are alone in the town, but then, as you move deeper into Zaragoza, you will begin to see them, shadows of people standing in doorways, watching from behind cracked windows, their figures indistinct and fleeting. Their movements are slow, deliberate, as though they are waiting for something or someone. You will catch glimpses of their faces, hollowed out and featureless, their eyes wide and glassy, staring at you without blinking. There is something profoundly wrong about them, something that makes your skin crawl as though they are not quite human, or not human at all. They do not speak. They do not move with any real purpose. But if you look too long, you will see their mouths moving, shaping words that never reach your ears. The sound is gone. The air, heavy with silence, absorbs all noise, leaving only the unsettling, silent motion of their lips. It is as though they are trying to speak to you, to communicate something lost, something forgotten. But the words remain locked behind their unblinking eyes. And then, there is the way they watch. They do not simply glance at you, in passing. They observe you, study you with a knowing intensity, as though they are waiting for you to do something they already understand. They wait for you to speak, to move, to make your presence known, and they wait for you to leave, for you to return. There is a certain dread that builds the longer you stay in Zaragoza, a creeping unease that gnaws at the edges of your mind. The townspeople, or whatever they are, begin to appear more frequently, their glassy eyes following your every step. Their faces, though lifeless, seem to carry a hint of recognition, as if they have seen you before, as if they know who you are even though you have never set foot here in your life. Their presence feels invasive, suffocating, as though they are waiting for you to remember something buried deep inside, something long forgotten. And when you leave, when you turn back to the road that will take you away from Zaragoza, you may feel a sense of relief, only to realize that it is not over. For you will never forget those glassy eyes, those silent faces, and the way they watched you, waited for you. They know you now. They have seen you. You may think that you can leave Zaragoza behind, that it will fade into the hazy recesses of your memory, but you will be wrong. There are no accidents here. The town knows who you are, and it knows that you will return. It does not matter how far you drive, or how many years pass. The roads will guide you back to that forsaken place, to that wrong town where the sun never truly sets and the shadows never quite align. And when you do return, if you are foolish enough to do so, you will find that the people, or the things, that wear the suggestion of people, will be waiting for you. They will greet you with that same empty gaze, their mouths silently forming words you cannot hear. They will remember you, and they will make sure you never leave again. For Zaragoza is a town not of the world we know, but of something else, something older, something ancient. It is a place that exists in the cracks between dimensions, a town that lives on the fringes of reality, where the line between life and death, between the known and the forgotten, is blurred beyond recognition. And once you see it, once you step foot within its borders, you cannot forget. Zaragoza will always wait for you in the twilight, in the shadows, beneath the weight of time and memory. It will know you, and it will never let you go.